Long before the great pyramids reached towards the sky, long before the names of pharaohs echoed through thousands of years, Egypt was merely a fragile ribbon of life squeezed between the dry arms of the desert. Humanity had passed through here since the dawn of time, leaving behind rough stone tools along the banks of the Nile, the mother river, gentle yet merciless when she withheld her gift of flood silt. The Nile did not merely bring water, it brought hope, life, and the primal terror of silence. When the Sahara was still green, people laughed beneath tall grasses, painting leaping antelopes and glittering stars upon the rocks. Nabta Playa, the ancient stone circle standing quietly in the desert, whispers from the distant past, "We once knew how to read the heavens. We once knew how to wait for the seasons." But then the rain stopped, the grass withered, the animals fled. People stood on the riverbank, watching the red desert creep closer, and a deep, ancient fear rose in their chests. Without the Nile, we will die. They called the fertile land Kemet, the Black Land, where hearts beat, where children cried and laughed, where love blossomed. The desert they named Deshret, the Red Land, where the gods Set roared, where lost souls wandered. 2 lands, 2 skin tones, 2 crowns, 2 gods, but one shared longing, to live, to be remembered, to endure. Then Narmer came, a man whose name carried the breath of the electric catfish, the silent hunter of the dark waters. On the Narmer pallet we see him gripping his enemy's hair, raising the stone mace high, eyes unwavering. Yet behind that proud gaze, did he tremble too? Did he fear that without unity the 2 lands would remain forever divided, and the Nile would witness the extinction of the very children it had nourished? When he founded Memphis, the white city balanced perfectly between valley and delta, perhaps he stood by the river, felt the cool breath of the coming flood, and whispered to himself, "I have given you a beginning, let it last forever." But deep in his heart he already knew, nothing lasts forever. And it was that quiet, unspoken sorrow that laid the foundation for one of humanity's greatest civilizations, a civilization born carrying both pride and the faint premonition of its own fading. Old Kingdom, 2686 to 2181 BC, Age of the Pyramids, approximately 530. They did not build pyramids merely to bury bodies. They built them to defy death, to shout into the face of time, "We were here, we loved, we dreamed of touching the stars." When Imhotep laid the first stone of Djoser's step pyramid, he was not just constructing a tomb, he was carving a prayer in stone, a desperate prayer that the pharaoh's soul would never lose its way in the eternal dark. 6 ascending steps reached toward the realm of the gods, and from Memphis the people must have wept with awe. "Our king is climbing to heaven. He has not abandoned us." Sneferu suffered more. He dreamed of a perfect pyramid, smooth as sunlight. But Midam collapsed. The thunder of falling stone echoed like the weeping of an entire nation. The bent pyramid broke halfway, the shame carved forever into the king's soul. Only the red pyramid finally brought him peace. Yet even that smile must have been tinged with tears. He was old, exhausted, and he understood that even this victory was only temporary. Then came Khufu. The Great Pyramid of Giza was not merely a monument, it was an obsession. 2.3 million blocks, each weighing tens of tons, stacked in just 23 short years. The workers, barefoot farmers, fathers, husbands, sang the names of their teams with pride, friends of Khufu, the drunken gang of Menkaure. They drank beer, ate meat, laughed together, and when they died, they were buried with honor near their king. They were proud, they loved, and they knew that when they were gone, the pyramid would still stand, like a promise that their lives had not been meaningless. Yet within that splendor lay a deep sadness. Every stone laid was a whispered confession, "We are afraid of being forgotten." They built so high because they feared that without such grandeur, their names would vanish like dust on the Nile's banks. And it is precisely that fear that gives the Old Kingdom its heartbreaking beauty, the beauty of people who knew they would die, yet still screamed with all their might into the endless void.
3. First Intermediate Period, 2181 to 2055 BC. When the Nile floods failed to arrive, Egypt did not merely starve, it broke. For centuries, the sacred order of Ma'at, the divine balance of the universe, had held everything in harmony. Now it was torn apart. People looked at one another with suspicion. They ate their own children. They wept in the darkness and no longer believed in the gods. Pepi II, the boy who ascended the throne at 6 and ruled for nearly a century, became the living symbol of prolonged tragedy. As he grew frail, his grown sons and grandsons stood beside his deathbed, eyes burning with hunger for the crown. Central authority crumbled like dry sand. The nomarchs declared themselves kings, built tombs grander than the pharaohs, and carved boastful words into the walls filled with bitterness. When the whole country starved, I fed the people of my province. The words of Ipuwer sound like stifled sobs. Laughter has died. People rob. Peasants take up shields. There is no cedar left for coffins, no fragrant oil for the gods. It was the cry of a nation realizing that the eternity they once believed in had been nothing but illusion. Yet, in the midst of that agony, a faint light flickered. Hope. The prophecy of Nefertati promised, "A king will come. He will wipe the tears from Egypt's eyes." Those were not mere predictions. They were the desperate prayers of people who had lost everything, yet still clung to the belief that darkness would eventually pass. This period was the deepest wound in Egypt's history, the wound of betrayal, of hunger, of shattered faith. But it was that very wound that taught them civilization is not pyramids, not gold. It is the ability to rise again after falling, to weep, and then to smile once more. 4. Middle Kingdom, 2055 to 1650 BC. Mentuhotep II entered history with blood on his hands and a heart full of longing. He defeated the northern enemy, burned their cities, and perhaps wept when he gazed upon the ashes of sacred Abydos. He did not merely reunite the land, he stitched together the torn soul of a nation. Thebes became the beating heart of Egypt. Amun, the small local god of wind and fertility, slowly grew, merging with Ra to become Amun-Ra, the supreme deity. And with that rise came Egypt's golden age of storytelling. Sinuhe, the man in exile, lay beside foreign rivers, his heart breaking with homesickness for the scent of Kemet's soil. The shipwrecked sailor met the giant divine serpent and heard words that melt the soul. Whoever survives will have a wonderful story to tell. These stories were more than entertainment. They were medicine for souls exhausted by chaos. They reminded people, even when hungry, even when dying, even when everything is lost, humans can still dream, still tell tales, still love. Senusret III was different. He built fortresses, carved victory stelae with cold words. I have pushed the border farther than my father. Yet his statues, haggard faces, anxious eyes, enormous ears as if straining to hear every whisper in the kingdom, tell another story, the loneliness of absolute power. He feared betrayal. He feared losing everything he had bled to create. The Middle Kingdom was the most beautiful era in terms of the human spirit, yet also the most fragile. They wrote literature, they dreamed, they loved life, but deep down, they knew the darkness was still waiting just beyond the horizon. 5. Second Intermediate Period and Hyksos, 1650 to 1550 BC. The Hyksos arrived like a nightmare. They brought horses, war chariots, new bows, weapons Egypt had never seen. They seized the delta, took Memphis, and stood upon the ancient pyramids with mocking smiles. Native Egyptians looked at them with hatred mixed with terror. Foreigners are sitting on the thrones of our ancestors. In Thebes, Kamos could bear it no longer. He wrote words burning with fury. I sit here, trapped between two enemies. I will tear open his belly. He fought, he burned, he took revenge, but death stole him too soon. His son Amos carried on. He recaptured Memphis, drove the Hyksos across the Sinai Desert, and stood before the Great Pyramid of Giza, already more than 1,000 years old, tears streaming down his face. We are still here. We are still Egypt. Amos built the last pyramid in Egyptian history at Abydos, a tearful declaration. We will not forget. We will not disappear. It was the most moving moment, a nation that had just survived a long nightmare, filled with both pride and fear, and determined to rise again.
6. New Kingdom, 1250 to 1070 BC. The New Kingdom was the dream made real, and also the dream that knew it was about to shatter. Hatshepsut, the greatest woman pharaoh, stood before her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bakhri, watching the fleet return from Punt, laden with incense, precious woods, baboons, and smiled. No king before me has ever done this. She proved that a woman could make history, but also bore the loneliness of having to prove herself twice over. Akhenaten was different. He looked up at the sun disk and saw the only God. He abandoned Thebes, built Akhetaten in the middle of the desert, and sang hymns of intoxicating beauty. You are the sole God. You live in my heart. But when the plague arrived, when his daughters, his wife, his mother died one by one, he must have wept in the night. He had gambled everything and lost. Tutankhamun, the 9-year-old boy, returned to the old gods, restored Amun, and died far too young. His tomb was buried by sand after a flash flood, and more than 3,000 years later, when Howard Carter opened it, the whole world wept at the beauty and sorrow of a child burdened with an entire empire. Ramesses II, Ozymandias, fought at Kadesh, signed the first recorded peace treaty in history, built temples everywhere, and as he grew old, watched his sons die one after another, his heart breaking. He carved his name deep into stone, as if terrified of being forgotten. Ramesses III defeated the Sea Peoples in a desperate battle at the Nile's mouth. He won, but knew the victory was only temporary. He had saved Egypt, but he could not save its soul. After the great victory came the long agony. Land grew barren, the Nile floods became erratic, workers went on strike for the first time in history. They shouted, "We are hungry, no more fish, no more vegetables, no more oil." The pharaoh's authority trembled. Then came the harem conspiracy. Queen T and her son Pentawar slit Ramesses III's throat during the festival night. His blood pooled on the stone floor. He died, but his enemies did not win. His son crushed the plot, executed the traitors, and gave them shameful new names in death. Ra hates him. Yet real power had already slipped into the hands of the high priests of Amun. They were richer than the pharaoh, commanded private armies, owned vast lands. Egypt split in two, not merely two lands, but two opposing souls. When the Cushites ascended the throne, they wept with joy. At last they, the once oppressed, wore the double crown. But the joy was brief. Ashurbanipal came, sacked Thebes, carried away 2 electrum-covered obelisks, and left behind ruins. That day, Egypt understood. It was no longer the center of the world. 8. Late period and foreign rule. Persia came, Alexander came, Ptolemy came. Cleopatra, the last woman of Egyptian blood, learned the Egyptian language, loved Caesar, loved Antony, and when she lost, chose death. Not with a snake, perhaps only a bitter cup of poison. She died in pain and pride.
I will not let Octavian parade me in chains through Rome. When she closed her eyes, more than 3,000 years of Egyptian history closed too. The Great Pyramid was already 2,500 years old. She lived closer to our time than to the day it was built. 9. Final extinction of the culture. In 394 CE, on the island of Philae, Nesmeterichem carved the last hieroglyphic inscription, "May it last forever." He did not know it was a farewell. The temples were closed, the gods fell silent. Cats were no longer worshipped. Hieroglyphs sank into oblivion. More than 1,400 years later, when Champollion deciphered the script, ancient Egypt awoke, but only as a beautiful, sorrowful dream. The pyramids still stand, the Sphinx still gazes into the distance, but no one can any longer hear their whispered secrets. And in that sadness, we hear again the song of the harpist from 4,200 years ago. One generation passes, another remains. The gods of old rest in their pyramids. Follow your heart and live joyfully, for the day of mourning will surely come. Egypt did not merely fall, it faded, gently, sorrowfully, and beautifully, like the final red sunset over the Nile. And we who live afterward can only bow our heads and quietly shed tears before the beauty and fragility of everything that ends.